Hi, I'm George Norrie, and welcome to our Coast to Coast AM YouTube channel. Have fun, tell your friends, and share us with everyone. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Coast to Coast AM's mobile app. And always remember to log on to our website at coasttocoastam.com for daily articles, the best paranormal information, and all you need to know about your favorite guests. And now you can become a Coast Insider directly through the Coast mobile app. We welcome our international listeners and even offer a free 2-week trial. So don't delay. Become an insider today.
Good evening, everyone. You're in the right place at the right time. This is Coast to Coast AM, blasting out of the Mojave Desert like a Scirocco, blazing across the land, slamming into your radio like a supercharged nanoparticle of unobtainium. Greetings from the boldest, bawdiest, most outrageous city in the world, the planetary capital of sun, fun, sin, sex, and secrets, my not-so-humble hometown, Las Vegas, Nevada. My name is George Knapp, your occasional host, designated driver of the airwaves, and moderator of tonight's upcoming cacophonous cavalcade of conversation. We have some hot topics to ponder tonight. If you follow the UFO mystery, as we and so many of you do, it's one of the reasons you're here, right? Then you know there's been a flurry of news, some really sensational stuff, some downright confounding. A lot of it tinged with a spookiness factor. It's unfolding kind of like a slow-motion car wreck in one sense. So much has happened in such a short time that it's sometimes hard to absorb and digest all of it. Since I was here last, a significant new name has been added to the list of UFO whistleblowers. That name is David Grush, a longtime intelligence official who interacted with special access programs, had the highest security clearances in our government, and who stepped forward to say that he's been targeted for retribution because he's been telling Congress some pretty exciting accounts about UFOs, about crash retrieval programs, reverse engineering, the kind of stories that have been bandied about in UFO world for a very long time, but stories that haven't had a lot of meat on the bones. Dave Grush might be the first of many insiders to step forward with solid leads for Congress about these matters, leads that could end up in the bowels of some defense contractor, hidden hangars, storerooms, vaults, places where the goodies have allegedly been stored and examined for decades. So what are we to make of these claims? Where might they lead? Someone who's been right in the middle of this story long before the public knew Dave's name is a friend of mine, Jeremy Corbell. As you know, he's a UFO investigator and a filmmaker. And you also know that Jeremy and I have worked together in pursuing many UAP-related topics and people. And I thought you might appreciate hearing about the evolution of the Dave Grush story, where it might lead, what it means for other related fingers of the UFO mystery. What does it say about AARO, too, the Pentagon's officially designated UFO investigation agency? Jeremy joins me momentarily to jump into those and other still unfolding UFO UAP subjects. About 2 weeks ago, a huge story related to the UFO subject broke. It was published by The Debrief, an online publication well known in the fields of defense and science, and especially UFOs. The article was written by two well-known journalists, Ralph Blumenthal, a veteran reporter for the New York Times, and Leslie Kane, a freelance journalist and TV producer who was part of that team that broke the big December 2017 UFO article in the Times, a story that really changed the UFO topic forever. Their story, the current story, focused on a veteran intelligence officer named David Grush, who retired from his government job back in April and has since told his story publicly for the first time. And what a story it is. Right after the debrief report dropped, a televised interview with Mr. Grush, conducted by our friend and colleague Ross Coulthart, aired on News Nation, and then it exploded onto major news platforms all over the world. What Dave Grush had to say was sensational, but he's told the same story to Congress in hours of testimony behind closed doors, and more importantly, told it under oath. Hints about crashed flying saucers, reverse engineering programs, cover-ups, lies, and threats. Turns out Dave Grush has been sharing his story in confidence with a small number of journalists and investigators. Among them is our first guest tonight. You know, it's no secret that Jeremy Corbell and I are friends. We've collaborated on investigations and projects in the past, including two of his films. He's worked hard to develop his own network of sources, insiders, current and former government operatives in this country and beyond, and is really making a mark in this field. One of the sources he's developed is a guy named Dave Grush. Jeremy, great to have you back on Coast, first time since last year.
Man, it's been a while. Great to be back, George.
So take us back to a year ago, Huntsville, Alabama, the SCU conference. A lot of movers and shakers are there, spies and spooks and covert types gathered to share information and swap stories and check each other out. How is it that you first met and talked to Dave Grush, and what did you think of him at first?
Right. Well, that is a very accurate description. I mean, so our audience knows. I mean, really, you told me we're getting on a plane, we're going somewhere, we're going to interview some people. I had a bunch of phone calls telling me people were going to approach us, but I wasn't sure. You asked about the first time I met David Grush. Well, it's the first time you did too. And that moment was so interesting. We were filming, so we actually caught the moment on camera when he first approached you at the SCU conference, which is the scientific conference on UFOs. And I didn't know what to make of David Grush. He's a big dude. He's super interesting, highly intelligent. We had to vet him. I'm glad now that the public has heard David Grush's account of what he says happened to him. You know, that was, it was over a year ago when he came to us. And he appeared the subject of reprisal. And for people to understand what that means is he uncovered something. He uncovered lies and illegal activity. In fact, he was tasked with uncovering that for the UAPTF, which is the UAP task force. And at the time, he appeared to be the subject of reprisal. And we vetted him. We held his account in confidence all this time. And that was really hard for me, George. Yeah. I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs. I'm sure you did as well, that this is going on. But we had to take our time, and we did. So my first impression of him was, let's vet him. Every word he says, let's vet him. But we learned a lot.
I mean, obviously, he's a smart guy. We learned pretty quickly that he really did work where he says he worked, which is always a key, right? You know, you have UFO insiders who step forward and say this and that, and then you find out that you can't verify where they worked or what kind of jobs they had. This guy really was in a position to know some of the things he was telling us. What was his job? Who did he work for?
Right. So to go over what you said and to be abundantly clear, so Dave or David Grush is who he says he is. He was in the position that he says he was in, and he had access to what he says he had. You know, he appears to me to be credible as a person. I've gotten to know him. I think it would be reckless not to take his claims seriously. They should be investigated. So, yeah, man, the first time that he came up to us and kind of what we learned over this time is he was working for the UAPTF. Again, that was at the time the Intermediary UFO or UAP Task Force. Now, here's what people don't understand. He was specifically tasked to look into special access programs for any UAP shenanigans. He was told to look into these UFO programs in these special access programs, over 2,000, as you have reported many times, George, and to see if there was any kind of oversight issue, if they're not reporting properly. And in fact, he found criminal activity.
He worked for something called it's a three-letter agency, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the NGA. It's a really important agency. They basically, my understanding of it, they track everything. They track things in space, in the air. They track things on land, on sea, undersea. They keep track of everything. So they have immense resources, and they interact with all kinds of special access programs. And my understanding is, and you can correct me, that he was sort of assigned as the liaison from NGA, his agency, his employer, to the UAP task force, which was headed by a guy named Jay Stratton, who also lives there, by the way, in Huntsville, Alabama. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But he's tasked with, you go over and be the liaison from this agency to the UAP task force, which it was trying to establish a network of people throughout government to help it get to the bottom of the UFO UAP mystery, right?
Yeah, he wasn't sort of assigned. He was assigned. So, yeah, you're talking about the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And so for people that don't know, there's the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office. So there's kind of, from my understanding, is there's a hardware and a software issue going on here. So you have the NRO, which has all the great satellite hardware, that sort of thing, and you've got a lot of great analysts that work at the NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and David Grush, he's one of these people that was specifically tasked by the UAPTF. That was his job, literally, his assigned job, to begin uncovering this, to see if there were special access programs or compartmentalized black budget programs that were working on UFOs or the back engineering of UFOs or legacy programs, and what was going on. So he had this ultra cross clearance of being able to ask questions when normally, even if you have the clearance, there's two sides to the coin of intelligence, right? There's the clearance level, but then there's the need to know. Because he had the need to know, he was able to ask questions that most people can't ask, and he had access that most people don't have. So yes, that was the organization he worked in. He originally came from the Air Force. He had some really cool duties along the way, but this is a career intelligence agent. It's so important to stress. This is a whistleblower. Dave Grush did not intend to come forward at this time. His hand was forced. He provided classified testimony under oath in skiffs, in these settings where nothing can leave the room. This is a guy, I at this point, I really respect him. And by the way, the Inspector General of Intelligence, right, the Intelligence Community Inspector General, found his complaint credible and urgent. I also find his complaint credible and urgent.
A year ago, when we first met him, there were only limited things he could say. He hinted there was so much more. But at that point, a year ago, he was already feeling the heat. He already felt like he was in somebody's crosshairs and they were coming for him because of what he had uncovered. Do you have a sense, and I don't have the answer to this, do you have a sense of how soon after he was given that assignment by the UAP task force, by Jay Stratton, hey, go see if you find any evidence in these special access programs that there's hanky-panky underway, that money is being spent on something, that lies are being told, that there might actually be a reverse engineering program that has been hidden from Congress. How soon after he was given that assignment did he actually start finding breadcrumbs and indications of that, or do you know?
I'm not sure exactly how soon. However, it did not take long. Look, people need to understand a couple of things. First of all, he never crossed the line. Approaching a journalist like yourself, George, when he approached you and then told us the basics, he never said anything classified. He never, ever crossed that line with us. His point has always been, in his own words, truth to power. He is a true whistleblower. He is telling people what happened. He believes that people deserve to know these answers. Now, again, look, we have an atomic program. We're not going to tell people how to build an atomic bomb, but we told them and we showed them that we made it. So his point is like, I am feeling at this time pressured from the inside. It didn't take long. So to answer your question directly, he put people, known names, but mostly unknown names. So not people within the world or the sphere of the UFO study that people know at this time, put them under oath, in skiffs, in classified settings, with the need and the right to know, and he drilled them. He absolutely asked them questions, and he figured out very quickly, I would suspect from that process, that there are legacy UFO programs, durational, like, again, we know the names, like these names of these programs that are being so safeguarded. It's incredible because they cover not just UFOs. So you could get in trouble for even saying the name because these names, let's say crash retrievals, right? They'll cover retrievals of like foreign technologies from other countries, but also UFOs. So these program names are kind of the key. So when he started seeing this, and then he started putting people under oath, and he started putting them under oath in the classified setting where they had to tell the answer, reluctantly, people did. And so he found out at that time that there has been a massive cover-up, that everything that we had been thinking and had heard was true, that there are exploitation programs across multiple nations.
I mean, for one guy to investigate this and within a matter of months find evidence, find breadcrumbs that lead a trail to reverse engineering, crash retrievals, hidden programs. I mean, we've been hearing this stuff for a long time. Me, about 35 years, and you for quite a few years yourself, that, somewhere in the bowels of these defense contractors, there are actual flying saucers stashed. They keep them off the books so that Congress can't find them and people like us can't find them, but they're there. So it's pretty exciting stuff what Dave Grush found evidence of. Where it goes next, though, is pretty intriguing because it really got him in hot water. We're talking with investigative filmmaker Jeremy Corbell. We'll continue our conversation in a moment. We're talking with filmmaker, investigative reporter Jeremy Corbell about this new UFO whistleblower who's come forward. His name is David Grush. He worked for something called the NGA and was the liaison from that agency to the UAP task force, and was given the job to see if he could find out any evidence of financial irregularities, indications that there were secret programs that were being hidden from Congress that were involved with crash retrievals and reverse engineering, the kinds of stories that have floated around UFO world for decades. But until now, there wasn't a lot of meat on the bones. We continue our conversation right after this on Coast to Coast AM. Jeremy Corbell, returning to a year ago when we first met David Grush, he shared some things with us at the time. And, since then, we don't want to make it sound like, we were the first guys to know him, because we don't know exactly who else he was talking to. He was scared. I mean, the reason he was talking to us was he was scared, because it wasn't very long after he started digging up these pearls of information and sharing them under oath, which was his job. He's supposed to report it up through the process, through the chain of command. That was his duty. He starts getting the feeling that someone's painted a target on his forehead, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I just want to be clear. We were the first people he came to. So that's not a matter of, don't want to sound like that. He came to us first. And the reason he did that was because he had actionable reprisals against him. He was just filing this Inspector General complaint. He was worried about his personal safety. He had seen reprisals against other coworkers. What he had uncovered goes way beyond UFOs, in that it uncovered a break in our system, a legal break in our system. I mean, so let's put it into perspective. If he was talking about anything other than UFOs, then this would be an absolute different matter. People would take this differently. But because it's UFOs, there's a little bit of a stigma. However, that is reducing. But he was genuinely concerned about his well-being, and for good reason, which is detailed in his classified version of the Inspector General report, which we have released the unclassified letters that basically shows that he filed that. But yeah, Dave's been through the ringer, man. Just if you look at it from any military person's perspective, so any military person that's listening to this tonight, they can appreciate what he did, how he did it right, how he went forward and brought this information in the right way to people. He came to us as kind of like a death switch, just, hey, here's the deal. I just want somebody to be aware of this. That was all. It wasn't so we could report on it.
We should point out, too, that was not the only communication, is that not a month or two later, he came to Las Vegas. There was a Star Trek convention. They have the annual convention here in Las Vegas. It's a big, grand event. It's very cool. And they speak on, of course, Star Trek-related topics, characters, actors, things of that sort, plots, movies. But they also cover a lot of other tech-related issues. A lot of technology was inspired by Star Trek, and we see evidence of it all around us. Virtual reality technology, there were discussions of that. It was a very cool event where we were going to be, and Dave happens to be a Star Trek fan. He's not a crazy guy who goes to these conventions, and not that dressing up like a Klingon makes you crazy, but, he's not an extreme fan. He's just a fan. And he used it as an excuse to come out to Las Vegas. Now, once that comes out, after he goes public, that he had ever met with us at a Star Trek convention in Las Vegas, it becomes a bludgeon by which to beat him up. Well, gosh, how serious can this guy be? He likes Star Trek. Talk about the reaction in between when he went public and also from the time when we knew him, what the reaction to his claims have been so far, both in UFO world, in Capitol Hill, and in the world beyond.
Yeah. So look, that is so. So here's the deal. My friend is a guy named Rod Roddenberry. I grew up with him. I did jujitsu with him. We trained our lives together. He happens to be, the son of Gene Roddenberry, who's the creator of Star Trek. So he was like, "Hey, will you come talk about UFOs with George Knapp?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, that sounds great. It's in Las Vegas." So talking with Dave during that time, I was like, "Hey, I've got a great place. We can meet up." And he's like, "Oh, I'm down. That sounds great." He is a fan of that. That's not a crime, right, to be a fan of that? So we were all excited to meet up there. But what we did was we met and we continued to get to know and to vet Dave as a human being and also just his basic unclassified claims. We invited a friend of ours to kind of join us. And just to kind of observe, he didn't know the nature that Dave Grush was going to be this whistleblower with the UFO thing. But we invited him to come in and join us. If people know and they follow on Twitter, it's UFO Joe.
Joe Mergia, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that was kind of cool. So he could kind of meet Dave as well and kind of see what's going on. So that was just an opportunity. The hard part, George, and this was for me, it was kind of heartbreaking. I know that the reprisals and the problems occurred before all of this, but the day after David Grush got back from meeting with us, he got walked out of his office at the NGA, that next morning, and was basically put on probation. It was like, you talking to journalists? What are you doing? They tried all sorts of things with him. He never crossed the line with us. Never once. And I would have done it the same way as he did. And in fact, he kind of beat that in a sense. Like, he got all his clearances back. It was this kind of impotent attempt to put pressure and to intimidate him. And he's not a guy that's easily intimidated. So those are the facts. That is the order in which things happened. However, I would like to note that these reprisals were really poorly timed. I mean, it's unbelievable. We were talking for those couple weeks he was sitting at home when he was not able to be at work, which was totally different than our previous conversations, right? So he's temporarily held back. Well, within those 2 or 3 weeks, he was scheduled to go give classified briefings on the Hill about this, and he was scheduled to do it. I will tell you, to the hour in which he arrived to the Hill to give these classified briefings, they tried another reprisal. They tried to actually strip him of his clearances to the hour in which he was supposed to give these briefings. It didn't work. He was literally there in the room when they tried that. It didn't work, but this is the kind of thing that they try to do to silence whistleblowers. And we have to protect people like this. Whether you believe them, whether it's accurate or not, the process of being a whistleblower, the process of somebody breaking from the fold and coming forward from the military and saying, this is what I saw, this injustice. We have to protect that ability of people to do that. So I hope that's a little more information for your audience. That did happen. That is a fact. Everything I laid out happened like that.
We should point out that Dave really made a good decision when he hired the lawyer who's been representing him. This guy had been the inspector general for the intelligence community. He held the top job that would evaluate the kinds of complaints that Dave ended up having to make because he was being targeted by persons that we can get into in a bit. But they were going after him. They tried to strip him of his clearance. They tried to stop him from testifying before Congress. But he went ahead and did it. Do you know how much testimony he gave and to whom, and a general idea about what he told Congress behind closed doors?
Yeah, I think the fundamentals are out there. I think that everything that is unclassified that he told has been said in an interview. And I think that anything further than that is something that he can't, and he's been really clear. You know, we can get into that about Arrow and what they should know and what they do know and what they're not saying. But Dave Grush has said everything publicly that he can tell. There's not a single thing more that he can say that's not within the classified realm.
You know, you and I have reported about crash recovery programs, rumors, really, the stories that have been around. I mean, we've gone a little bit further than rumors, as have other journalists in this topic who've tried to track this stuff down. Do we really have crash saucers or fully intact saucers? Do we have metamaterials from somewhere else that are being analyzed? Do we have bodies? Do you happen to know if Dave was able to say anything like that behind closed doors to members of Congress or congressional staff?
You know, what I will say is that he should, people have said he should have said it through Arrow. So Susan, I don't know how to say her name. Susan Goff.
I think it's Goff.
Okay,
yeah, I think it's Goff.
Correct. So basically, she said, well, Dave should have gone through the Arrow. She's the spokesperson for the Pentagon on all UAP issues, which is funny to begin with, right? But Arrow wasn't born when Dave first disclosed to the IG of Intelligence what happened to him. His lawyer that you're talking about that used to be in that position, it's so amazing. He got somebody of that position to be his lawyer. But he has had multiple discussions with Dr. Kirkpatrick, and he did give him the broad strokes, as you're kind of asking about. And it's clear that Dr. Kirkpatrick either didn't follow up or he is intentionally obfuscating to the public on the big picture elements of the UAP mystery that he has learned about. And this is one of the reasons that numerous whistleblowers that we have talked to, George, you and I have talked to them, that they do not feel, I'll say, motivated to reveal their cards at this time. They're trying to see, is Arrow trustworthy? So Dave has said, and here's an exact quote, Arrow can contact the ICIG, the Intelligence Community Inspector General, and they can determine Arrow's need to know and provide them with information on his complaint as deemed appropriate. So he's saying, look, I tried to tell you, you didn't follow up, so you can go talk to the ICIG because I just went above you. And so that's kind of where we're at. Is people need to learn to trust Arrow. But furthermore, and kind of problematically, I'll say this. People talk about, well, does Arrow have the clearance? Could Arrow even investigate this stuff? Dr. Kirkpatrick has clearance into all controlled access programs. It's called CAPS, all controlled access programs. You don't need Title 10 or Title 50 authority. That just gives you the ability to task other agencies for collection, exploitation, operational, or oversight, whatever, right? It does not prevent him from being briefed. So Kirkpatrick, he still works under Ronald Moultrie, and Moultrie has Title 50, and it's his boss. He's the number one intelligence officer in the DOD. He is not inhibited in any way from getting briefed into anything. So this is kind of like the deal right now, is that, by the way, another little piece of information which the audience probably doesn't know, which is that there is a memo, and that memo is signed from the ODNI and the SAP kind of like lead for the DOD that says authorized, they are authorized to get any of these special access program information. They're authorized recipients. So this whole idea that Arrow and Kirkpatrick, that they couldn't look this up, they couldn't come to the same conclusions that Dave could, it's hogwash.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. It really makes you wonder about the direction of Arrow, because every time something like this comes up, the statements that come out of Arrow, Dr. Kirkpatrick is, I've seen no credible evidence of any ET or alien or advanced technology beyond what we know about here on Earth, that kind of a generic statement. And then Susan Goff at the Department of Defense, the only spokesperson allowed to talk about this stuff, she'll reiterate the same thing. It is sort of weasel words. It's like lawyerly words that they use to get around these kinds of serious allegations. Dave Grush shared his information with members of Congress, with congressional staff, on the record under oath. The question is, what does this mean for other whistleblowers now? They see how Arrow weasels around and tries to get around this, saying they've seen no credible evidence, even though they know Dave and others have spoken to Arrow, have presented them with documentation to an extent. It makes me think that some of these guys might have second thoughts about coming forward at all. Do we know if Dave's example has inspired others to come forward, and if so, how many do you think?
I don't know if you probably know the answer to this, George. I mean, we talk sometimes, but here's the deal. I mean, we have gotten individuals who are active in intelligence agencies who are worried right now that their names are going to be leaked by journalists, as happened with David Grush. And by the way, it was leaked before with inside the intelligence community. So this is a huge fear. These are people with jobs of high responsibility that have had hands-on, first-hand experience working on not only materials but craft. And so that I can say that as a fact is that individuals have come to us over the years. Specifically, I have been speaking with them on a daily basis. These individuals are, one, afraid for the reprisals because they saw what happened to Dave. They're rooting him on. They want to make sure that he comes out unscathed. So I really admire Dave for what he's done, regardless of his claims, what he has done. We're going to find out if it's true or if it's not true. And that's the responsibility, unfortunately, of Arrow, but also other Department of Justice groups. So here's the deal. Yeah, people are very much watching what happens with David Grush. And if there are any shenanigans, we are going to report on it. And what happens to him determines, is this going to be done the right way or the wrong way? Either way, it is happening. Either way, these accounts are coming out. Proof is coming out. It's just a matter of, can it be done under the control and oversight as it should be through the whistleblower protections, or is it going to be leaked to journalists who are protected and will put it out?
You know, it's fascinating to see the reaction, and a lot of it you could predict before you ever knew who Dave Grush was or even what he would say. But we knew how the battle lines would form after Dave goes public, and sure enough, it happened pretty much as predicted. Certain people will try to debunk him, even if they don't have something to debunk him with. They try to attack his credibility, and really none of those body blows landed at all. It's been funny to watch the typical debunker crowd flail around and fail to land a punch. But there is a legitimate issue that's been raised about Dave. He's talking about things he didn't see with his own eyes. He didn't see any crash saucers. He didn't see any alien bodies. How the heck does he know? It's not credible. So we got about a minute before we go to a break. I'd like you to at least start on that, and then we'll get back to it in a moment.
Yeah, people don't understand this, and I'm so glad you bring this up. First of all, I just want to say I am drinking the tears of the debunkers out of little tiny teacups with my fingers. There's a difference between skepticism and debunking. Debunking is just an attitude where you're trying to come to a predisposed kind of position. It's ridiculous. So moving on from that nonsense, people say David Grush didn't see anything with his own eyes. Oh, no, he did. What he saw was inside of SCIFs, inside of classified situations where he was grilling people, interrogating them, which, by the way, he's a highly trained interrogator if you don't know his past. He made sure that he found out the names of the programs, the locations of full-on UFOs, hardware, of craft. Now, he can't tell me where they are, but he knows for sure that these programs existed by name, where they were, who was working on them, and those people came in under oath and had to admit to it too. So people say he didn't see it with his own eyes. Understood. The problem is what he uncovered is so much bigger than just UFOs.
Seems likely that David Grush, the longtime intelligence officer who had high security clearances, the highest, has a big fat target on his back now. He was already feeling pressure for following procedure, for going through the chain of command, for doing it right, for speaking to Congress, which was about things that were his job. He was already under pressure, and now that he's gone public, oh my gosh, he's talking about things that, in the view of many inside our defense establishment, are not meant to be made public, that are none of Congress's business. The public shouldn't know about this stuff. You have to know that, these stories have been rumored for years. Crashed saucers, crash retrieval, reverse engineering programs, metamaterials, alien bodies, things of that sort. And now he's gone and taken them out of the rumor category. Boy, you better believe some people are gunning for Dave Grush. What does that mean for UFO investigations in general? Are we on the verge of something really big at long last? We're going to get into that with Jeremy Corbell. We'll save some time with for calls and questions from our viewers and listeners right after this on Coast to Coast AM. Give me your sense of where it really goes from here. Are we about to find out that there are crashed saucers in possession of, if not the government, then government defense contractors? Are we going to find out revelations about alien bodies? Is that happening?
Yes. We will.
When?
I mean, I hope pretty soon. I think that it's shocking, but it is nonetheless true. And I believe that we will be providing evidence to the public about that in the near future.
You know, I hate to even bring this up, and I'm sure that other people, whistleblowers who have information about this, don't want to be associated with it. But Bob Lazar said this stuff a long time ago. He's been largely discredited in the eyes of a lot of people. Wouldn't it be something if the story he told 30-some years ago turned out to be true?
Look, as you have said for decades, and I have said recently, you don't need to believe Bob Lazar to understand the truth about UFOs. However, I will add to that you cannot avoid Bob Lazar to understand the truth about UFOs. Bob Lazar told you the truth. He has continued to tell you the truth. Whether you can wrap your mind around that or not is up to you. And I do think it would be something if there was a full circle come back. What Bob Lazar said to the public is day by day, inch by inch, life's a cinch, just coming true. You are starting to realize that he has been honest with the American public and with the global public. So, here's the deal. It doesn't matter if you believe Bob. However, I'm going to wear my I Believe Bob shirt.
We know that there are elements within the Department of Defense that are sharpening their knives for Dave Grush. They want to go after him, and they're looking for reasons to do it. We know that he had that one interview on News Nation, and they expanded it to an hour program. And we also know from Ross Coulthart, who said that he recorded 7 hours of stuff. I can only imagine there's a lot of things in the 7-hour interview that might be fodder for investigators who are trying to trip Dave Grush up. Are you worried about that? What they might be able to do? Surely they're going to come after him.
Yeah, I am. Look, any ammunition. So first of all, people need to understand if David Grush is telling the truth, then he has exposed something that is groundbreaking, shaking, just foundationally devastating to the powers that be. So you have taught me this, which is you need to protect sources even if they don't protect themselves. So the deal is this: they're looking. Oftentimes, the public looks for any kind of movement that they can harm you with. And so at this point, kind of like how you and I don't release everything that comes into us, especially not right away, you got to look out for people. And I do hope that people do look out for David Grush because he has stepped forward and really put his neck on the line for this process in general. Again, if you remove UFOs from the equation, this is a test of what it means to be a patriot, of what this means to be an American, where we live under these laws and these rules. And although we should respect the golden rule of do no harm because of national security, the thing we should respect above all else is freedom of speech and truth to power. And that is why David Grush came forward.
Well, we know from firsthand experience there are folks in our government that do not want this stuff coming out, even less sensational things and aspects and cases. And we know that because Susan Goff, the Department of Defense spokesperson on everything related to UAP, issued a statement a couple of weeks ago saying that there is an active investigation into something that we made public, an image. Can you tell our audience on Coast what that image is and why somebody might be investigating its release?
Sure. So the Department of Defense has an active investigation into the release or into the content of what's called the Mosul Orb. And this was an image of a sphere that was flying with no control flight surfaces. It was an example that we gave forward that we said was in an it was contained within a classified briefing. This seems just so mind-boggling to people. It is inherently unclassified, meaning it was contained within a classified briefing, but it itself was not classified. So letting this out, informing the American public, which is the right and the duty of journalists in journalism. So we put that out. Well, it turns out the Sphere, this is the year of the Sphere. There are some incredible memes out there by Fettuccine Split, for an example. This guy on Twitter, he's amazing, right? And basically, we found out that the Sphere example of UAP or UFO is the most common. This is from the Department of Defense. So that image you're talking about that we released, that is an image from a video. And I think, maybe Susan Goff gets villainized. Maybe she's just a pawn for some, overlord that's telling her what to say. Maybe she's a good person. I never had a beer with her. I don't want to villainize anybody. But her statements have been false, not only obfuscating, they have been lies. And I believe she's been having off-record conversations with other journalists outside of the scope of her duties, which is a crime. So I'd like to say that this Mosul orb investigation, whatever they're looking into, it's important to keep it in context that as journalists, this is our First Amendment right, this is our constitutional right, to basically inform the public when they have a need to know. So that's what that hubbub was about, George.
It's pretty funny that after the release of the Mosul orb image, we got the typical pushback from the typical folks who tried to explain it away. First, they said, that's a raindrop. It's not a sphere. It's a raindrop on the lens of this platform that picked up the image over Mosul. Or then they said, it's probably a pothole in the road, really. It's not an orb. It's a pothole. So the people who say there is nothing to this are just fine with there being an active investigation, a criminal investigation into the release of the photo of a pothole, right? Hilarious.
It's cannon fodder. I mean, you're describing these ridiculous accusations by ridiculous people that are literally supposed to be journalists themselves, but are trying to paint a target on the First Amendment and the constitutional right and duty of journalists to report the news in the public interest. So it's ironic at best. But let's back up a little bit. The Mosul orb was an image from a video of an advanced craft of unknown origin that was flying over a conflict zone. It was the first time in human history when an image was put out like that by journalists. So that is important. We have now had later corroboration from our own Department of Defense saying that these things are the most common, that they're seeing as UAP, reported up the chain of command, no matter how broken it is. I'll tell you this. I've had a lot of conversations today with military individuals in position right now where they need to find out how to better report this, and they are frustrated. They are frustrated as hell. They are not going to take it anymore. The individuals who need to report on this need a better and clear, destigmatized reporting process so they can do their jobs. So this is what I'm hearing, as I call the word on the wash. As people say, it flows downstream. This is what I'm hearing. So at this point, man, I'm just, honestly, this is the moment where we're kicking in the doors and people can have tantrums. They can try to paint false targets, but we're not alone. There's a lot of people that know that this system needs to be mended. This whole process needs to be healed.
You that phrase, the year of the sphere, grabbed my ear. It's a good sound. And, we've seen a lot of examples of spheres, mystery spheres, over military targets. There was the object that tracked the USS Omaha, 2019, off the West Coast, 10 warships buzzed by more than 100, let's call them drones, unknown objects. One of them was a great big round circle that followed along for an hour with the USS Omaha, was picked up on thermal and on radar and other systems. And I guess, that was explained away as, it's probably a Chinese drone, as if that's an easily explanation and something that we shouldn't be concerned about. But I also understand that there was something similar in 2021 off the coast of Japan. Do you have details on that?
do have details on that. Additionally, not just Japan, but over the East Coast and I'll just say in other areas near Asia, there have been in active conflict zones swarms that have been very concerning. And the most concerning aspect about these swarms of UAP is that they are not U.S. technology. Now, you can say the word drone, George. You're being very nice about it. Okay, what is it? It's an unmanned aerial system. We're talking about the majority of UFOs or UAP are suspected to not be manned, meaning there's not a human being or any being inside there that is the size that we could imagine. So they could be remote controlled by artificial intelligence, but somebody is operating them. Let's just clear this up right now. In 2019, 10 Navy warships were swarmed by unidentifieds. They were not U.S. assets. This is known. They were not U.S. assets. We have proven definitively they were not Chinese. They were not Russia. So here's the deal. Yes, an entire swarm event also happened off the coast of Japan in 2021, and we will be reporting on that. But I'm not going to jump the gun because there was also a massive event that occurred just on the east coast of the United States. And in fact, to be honest with you, this is so common now that it's disturbing.
Let me ask you this. So Dave Grush's statements, his public statements, his closed-door testimony has got to be shaking a lot of folks. I mean, I wonder what our allies are thinking about this now. And I ask it in this context. We know that there are these so-called Five Eyes nations, the U.S., Canada, the U.K., Australia, New Zealand, very closely aligned on all issues, in particular on this one. And those countries tend to take their cues from the U.S. on the UFO issue. They don't talk about it. If the U.S. doesn't want them to talk about it, they don't. But I wonder what's happening now, as it looks like this is spilling out. What do those other countries do? Do they reevaluate their position of keeping mum about the subject?
The world is creaking under the stress and the weight of the UFO reality and UFO presence. And the Five Eyes Alliance, the exploitation programs that have been overseen by our allied nations, the five nations in the Five Eyes Alliance, that will be coming out. That information is correct. There have been exploitation programs by allied nations. And for sure, with 100% confidence, George, I can tell you that we will be breaking news on that information together. We will be breaking news on that. It is absolutely unavoidable and imminent.
You know, what happens to Dave Grush next, a lot of folks are going to be watching. The people who are whistleblowers, some of whom have already come forward and testified to Congress or to others up the chain of command within the proper context, proper procedures. Those folks have got to be nervous now, thinking, did I retroactively make a mistake? Can they come after me as well? If they can go after Dave, whose job it was to find out this information, can they come after me? And then all the whistleblowers, potential whistleblowers, who are still on the sidelines wondering, should I come forward and say what I know? They've been told there are whistleblower protections, that there are laws that Congress enacted to protect them, to encourage them to come forward. But I'd have to be, if I were in their position, I'd have to be wondering if that's a good idea or not. Can you address just what we have learned from the former Inspector General, the guy who now represents Dave Grush, about what is likely to unfold going forward on that score?
Yeah, I mean, I will say Mr. Grush's testimony, David Grush's testimony is crucial. It is crucial, and it is a crucial test of these whistleblowers and of the whistleblower protections. The hope is that David coming forward will encourage potential witnesses to be public, or at least within the classified realm, to come forward and break their NDAs, as they are allowed to do by law now. So this will test the whistleblower legislation that forbids retaliation. So I would say if the Department of Justice or the FBI or any agency were to raid David Grush, they would be sorely mistaken to do that, because the world's eyes are now on David Grush and how he is being treated about whistleblowing on UFOs and what has been going on with allied nations regarding reverse engineering of UFOs or UAP.
Well, I hope that those other 5 nations countries are reevaluating their position, whether or not it's a better idea to get out ahead of this. We've often wondered what would happen, okay, if the U.S. government is never going to admit what it knows. There's never going to be a day of disclosure where the president goes before the public and admits that there have been lies all these years, that it's real, that it's here, that we have the stuff. I wonder if those other countries might be considering doing something like that.
I would imagine that there are a number of countries right now that want to make sure that they do not lose the public trust of their citizens, and they do not lose face by staying behind the curve when it comes to what is going to come out imminently. I am positive that there are nations that are right now are just twisting their thumbs thinking, how do we get ahead of this with our communications plan, with our public-facing understanding? The truth has a way of coming out, and I know for sure that more of that truth will be coming out within the next 24 to 48 hours.
24 to 48 hours. That's pretty specific.
I can't predict the future perfectly, but I'm pretty confident with that.
Well, if you've got some info, you're free to spill it right here.
I couldn't say, George.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll open up the phone lines. I know a lot of you have questions for my guest, Jeremy Corbell. We're going to see what's on your mind here. Jeremy Corbell, we're discussing whistleblowers, UFO secret programs, crash retrievals, reverse engineering, lies, cover-ups. Is it all about to change? Did David Grush's story fundamentally alter our understanding of the UFO reality? We're going to see what's on your mind right after this as we go to the phones in our next segment of Coast to Coast AM. A lot of folks on the phones with calls, questions, comments for my guest, Jeremy Corbell. We're going to start with this number. He goes by a call sign of Guts, somebody that we know. His name is John Gutierrez. Can't say where he's calling in from, but John, hey, how you doing?
George, Jeremy, how the hell are you guys? Happy to be on the line with you. And first, let me just say real quick, as a longtime listener of the show and certainly a fan of whenever you're on, George, I never turn down the lights, but I always make sure to turn up the radio, and I certainly did that tonight when I found out as soon as I heard that you guys were going to be on. How are you guys?
We're good. We're really looking forward to hearing from you, Guts, because you are an active duty Navy commander, and you've got a unique insight into these subject matters and the whistleblower process. Can you give us your take on what you've heard tonight from Jeremy about Dave Grush?
Well, first of all, let me just say that that is my day job. But let me just make real clear that I'm not calling in the capacity of my day job. Simply calling in as a friend of you guys, hopefully a friend of the show, and certainly a fan of the show. I'm not. I want to make absolutely clear that I'm not speaking on behalf of the service in any way. I'm just kind of giving my own opinions,
Sure.
just like I have
Sure.
I have before. But the fact of the matter is that I guess I've got certainly some insights into this David Grush story, and a couple of points that I really hope isn't lost on the audience, and I want to make sure people are really listening to the points that you and Jeremy have made tonight. Number one, first and foremost, like Jeremy has said, David Grush did it right. He did it right by following the procedures that have long been established in terms of whistleblowers and coming forward with making things right. The fact that the IG, the Inspector General, was involved at all is a big, big deal. The fact that David Grush testified under oath in closed door or skiff settings to members of Congress, that is a big, big deal. And really the last point, I guess, is that reprisals. If there are any truths to the allegations that Dave has made in terms of reprisals, and based on what Jeremy has said tonight, I tend to believe your guys' track record. That is a big, big deal. So I understand that someone like Dave Grush might feel the spotlight is on him right now, but he needs to know that he's not alone. He does have support, certainly from folks that are like-minded, I think, like the rest of us are in terms of supporting him and his efforts. But the folks that should really be worried, and maybe this is a little bit controversial to say, but in my opinion, the folks that should be worried, if what you guys are saying tonight about, knives sharpening somewhere within the DOD, those are the folks that should be worried, because any sort of act of reprisal when it comes to this sort of whistleblower coming forward, that's a big deal. And I can just tell you from personal experience being involved with Inspector General cases in the past, any sort of act of reprisal, whether perceived or otherwise, that's a big deal, and they're going to get to the bottom of that. So I would just caution anybody who is looking out, like you mentioned, George, that people are gunning for someone like Dave Grush. I would think twice about something like that, because so far as we can tell, he did it, and he did it right, or at least has tried to do it right. And if anybody's getting in the way of that, that would make me more nervous than anything else.
John, can you give us a sense of, are you just the lone oddball in your unit? I'm not saying where it is, but I mean, or do you have a sense that other Navy personnel, people are interested in this subject, are following what's happening in the news?
Well, it's funny. I think as more time goes by, as stories like this one come out and make headlines, I think it's becoming more and more acceptable to talk about. And certainly in a work setting, guys have a little bit more leeway to maybe speak a little bit more freely in a secure setting and to offer their opinions, to talk about things that they've seen. But sure, just having a couple beers, at the old officers club or on base bar or whatever the case is. Sure, I think the topic is becoming more and more acceptable, because there's a there. There's something to all of these UAP cases and drone swarms and whatnot that you guys have even mentioned tonight. So I would say 5-10 years ago, sure, I might have been more of an oddball than not. But I think as more time goes by, certainly in the more recent past, I think it's becoming a little bit more and more. People are more comfortable to talk about it.
Jeremy, anything for Guts while we have him here before we move on to other callers?
No, I'm grateful, for Guts, for John Gutierrez, for just speaking with us as a patriot, as active duty. I do appreciate that. And I do appreciate you standing up for people that are doing the right thing. As far as we know and where we can tell, we should support that. This process is what makes our country different. And I appreciate you coming on to speak with us just in your own capacity as a civilian. Thank you.
Thanks, Guts. Appreciate the call.
Hey, thank you, guys. Have a great show. Thanks.
All righty. We're going to the wild card line. Bill in Los Angeles, I think, raises a pretty interesting point, a question that I have on my mind as well. Hey, Bill, welcome back to the program.
Yeah. Hi, George. You raised a really interesting question that I've dealt with in the past as a former journalist. And I think just to slightly disagree with Jeremy, although I hope all this stuff comes out personally, but a slight disagreement when he said that the public has a need to know or a right to know. It reminded me of a session that a bunch of us students had in 1986 with former CBS news president Fred Friendly at Columbia University, and just a kind of an informal meeting. And we were talking about things that CBS had decided not to report during the Vietnam War because it was against the national interest. Even CBS decided that. And some young student said, well, Mr. Friendly, the public has a right to know. And Mr. Friendly took a miniature Constitution. He tossed it at the student. He says, find me the right to know in the Constitution. And the fact is, there is a First Amendment that guarantees a free press, but there is technically no such thing as a right to know. And that's where the government can be very nasty when it says, you don't have the right to know this because you signed a non-disclosure agreement, or this is something that could affect the military, or, for example, you can't report troop movements during a war, even if, you think the public has the right to know about it. So this is very dicey territory. And I'm just a neutral observer who personally wants the information, but you have to be realistic. And I think there is a danger, names like Ellsberg, Snowden, Assange, and Snepp, the ex-CIA spook who got in trouble for publishing stuff. Those names come to mind. And journalists can fall into that trap. And not to get political, but we've seen some things in the last few months of whistleblowers, kind of getting the shaft, even though they went to Congress. And this is something that, even the former president of the United States fell into a trap when it came to supposed classified information. And the last thing on that, I think Mr. Bigelow, whom I've talked to occasionally, has intimated that this is what's kept him from just, spilling the beans, and some other military contractors that I know you've talked to. And they have a right to, they are justified in being cautious. So that's my take.
Yeah, Bill, let me paraphrase something, and then we'll kick it to Jeremy here, is that, national security concerns, there are national security concerns with this. Jeremy, as you said, we can say the atom bomb exists, but we won't release information on how to make one. But it seems like national security is inevitably involved with these kinds of materials. The search for this technology, the race to try to duplicate it using earthly means, is a real race, and whoever wins that race wins, period. The Russians want it, the Chinese want it, the Israelis might want it, we want it. How do you get around those national security concerns with this? How do you address it?
Yeah, your caller is right, is that there is an absolute, imperative for us to clarify what it is that people have a right to know. I can tell you, I don't have a daddy. I'm a right-hand man. My left hand, I'll hold it up, and I'll hold at bay, and I'll make sure that morality is number one. But my right hand is going to throw a punch. So that's who I am, and no matter what precedent has been set prior, I do have a right to know. I do have a duty to find out, and I don't need a constitution sitting in front of me to tell you that when I find out, and if I'm sure about it, then I'm going to tell people. So right or wrong, but I am in the right. That is my moral duty to allow the public to know a fundamental thing, if it be true, about the nature of reality and our position in it when it comes to the UFO, understanding. Now, here's the deal. Again, your caller is right. There's a whole bunch of nuance to that. Secrets should be kept, for sure. But what we're talking about, George, is we're talking about a fundamental understanding of our position in the universe, our knowledge. Are we alone? So I appreciate the position of the caller, but I will challenge it right back and say, who tells you you have a right or a need to know?
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate that. That was thought-provoking, and it's issues that we're going to have to grapple with, especially if this really is about to go spilling out. The idea of crash retrieval, reverse engineering programs, saucers stashed in some hangar somewhere, that's been around for a long time. A substantial portion of the public believes that to be true. A bigger portion probably believes it's nonsense, but that's been around a long time. Can you confirm that? Yes, it's real, without hurting national security? That's what we're going to have to be grappling with. I am sympathetic to the keepers of the secrets in one sense, is that how do you let it out partially without spilling all of the beans? We're going to the wild card line. Charles in Sebastopol, California. Hey, Charles, you're on Coast to Coast.
Hi, George, and hi, Jeremy. Thanks so much for doing this topic. It's great. I wanted to ask about the April 19 congressional hearing. I have two thoughts to cram in together. The first thing is, not very much was shown. In other words, I have seen, I'm sure you have too, dozens of actual videos from gun site videos. There have been multiple radar tracks from both land and sea. There were tracks of these objects going from almost suborbital to like sea level and back again at very short time, performing maneuvers that nobody could possibly do with a standard aircraft, et cetera. And yet very little of this was actually shown to the congressional hearing. And I kind of wonder what's going on there. I mean, they're purposely trying to obfuscate this entire concept. And a lot of the Congress people left that meeting saying, well, there's nothing there, let's go home, et cetera. The other thing is they made a point about triangles. People have been seeing triangles. So what they showed was a photograph with some lens flares that were triangle-shaped. It was very obvious these were lens flares. And they said, oh, well, this is the triangle evidence that people have been submitting, which was completely untrue. So what I'm getting at is, what do you think is really going on, and do you think there is going to be a change, or is this part of the, Project Blue Book approach to, destroying whatever information is available?
Yeah, good points, Charles. Jeremy?
Yeah. Look, in my position where I'm standing now, there is no stopping this information from coming forward. And there are whole countries that understand that that is the truth, that there's no stopping this from coming forward. Now, the depth of our understanding, the knowledge of that understanding, the elaboration, right, the details of the truth, that's a whole nother matter. But the fundamental reality is unstoppable. There is nothing that is going to stop that now. So I guess my answer is let's just wait and see what happens in the next, short amount of time.
I would agree with you, Charles. Those two congressional hearings after 54 years with no hearings, and we have two that are deeply disappointing, totally orchestrated and controlled. The first one was bad. The second one was pretty bad. At least they showed us some glimpses of something. I thought it was interesting that they showed an orb flying over Iraq, very almost identical to the image that Jeremy and I had made public just days before that thing. This one is a genuine mystery, but they don't acknowledge what the Pentagon had already said was, this is a legitimate image here. I know that those two hearings were pretty disappointing, that they were in fact kind of orchestrated and limited on purpose. I think those days are done. From what we've had some direct conversations with members of Congress, with staff members of Congress, they're ready to take the gloves off and get down to brass tacks. And I think we're going to see that before the end of the summer. Thanks for the call. We're going to go to Wayne in Tacoma. Hi, Wayne. What's on your mind?
Good evening. Good evening, gentlemen, George and Jeremy. Yes, on observation, I've been reading vast amounts of information about the technology of these devices for 20 years, ever since I think, George, you brought it out with Bob Lazar to begin with, and what Bob Lazar had to say about the functioning of the power of the devices. And it's been a little over 2 years since the Navy released their patent on their hybrid aerospace underwater craft that they made that works on gravity propulsion. And when the patent office said that this isn't possible, the Navy said, it's not just possible, we've already done it. So when the Navy talks, the government listens, I guess. Now, the observation that I have is that they've said that these...
Just let you know, Wayne, we got a minute left, so if you might want to get to it so Jeremy can respond, but thanks.
Yeah. Have you seen these devices go into solid material as well as water?
Yeah, that's been reported a lot of times. So transmedium may extend beyond aerospace, may extend beyond space, air, and sea. So I'm not going to discount that. I would suggest, and I want to say this really quickly because we have such a little amount of time, that the UAP material science programs that have been persistent, that they have a constricting issue. And this is something I just recently kind of did a tweet about, that our attempts to replicate these UAP systems simply materially, that they require an atomic layering, and that this has been the limiting factor, that these propulsion systems, as you have kind of said a second ago, that there has been this multinational attempt to replicate these, and that indeed the issue has been the material science. I would also kind of suggest that we have observed and we have learned that our understanding of physics needs to be reconsidered and it needs to be expanded upon, because what you're seeing with these propulsion systems, if they are gravity propelled as you proposed, right, that they would require a change in the way that we understood our known physics. So I hope that kind of helps a little bit, because what you said is really important.
Thanks, Wayne. Appreciate it. And all of our callers there. I should point out Philip Corso, Colonel Corso, years ago had told me, before he even went public, that the amazing part of the ET materials is that they built this stuff atom by atom. And until we are able to do that ourselves, we probably couldn't duplicate what they do. Jeremy Corbell, always great to talk to you, man. Thanks. If people want to check out your stuff, extraordinarybeliefs.com is your website, and I'll be talking to you soon.
Yeah, weaponize your curiosity. It's UFO Fight Club #1. Your next guest, can't wait for him. It's going to be amazing. And by the way, Robert Plant owes me an explanation about UFOs and how UFOs influenced his music. Just want to say it.
Yeah, Robert Plant, I should have played one of his songs tonight to get his attention. I hope he's listening. Thanks, Jeremy. Talk to you again.
We are not alone.
These are supposed to be some of the most verified images of giants.
People who do meditation for 60 days will lengthen their telomeres.
Soon we'll get results, and we'll let you know right here on Beyond Belief.
Things seem to be changing in the field of ufology. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
That's priceless.
Isn't that amazing?
Tesla wanted free energy, and look what happened to him.
Plenty of evidence to show that they're real. The real question is how and why.
There were Egyptian hieroglyphs out in the outback of Australia.
In Australia. What are the possibilities? Mars was inhabited, and these were built.
We almost can't duplicate today.
These are amazing topics. What if there was something like at Area 51 deep underwater?
They were killed by some animal.
Believe me, we're just getting started. I'm George Norrie, and we here at Gaia are committed to revealing the truth. From the City of Angels near the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. In a moment, Nick Pope joins us as we continue talking about NASA and UAPs, as they call them. I still call them UFOs. Nick's next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Well, you hear him on Coast to Coast quite often. You see him on the History Channel's Ancient Aliens. Nick Pope worked for the United Kingdom's Ministry of Defense for 21 years. And for much of the early 90s, he was positioned to a division where his duties included researching and investigating the UFO phenomenon. To access whether there was evidence of any threat to the defense of the UK, Nick took early retirement in 2006. Now lives here in the United States. He's a broadcaster, journalist, author, specializing in stories on UFOs, the unexplained. And Nick, it was great seeing you at Contact in the Desert.
Yeah, great to see you too, George. And my goodness, what a time for this subject. So many big stories hitting, and I'm sure we'll get into all of that. But yeah, it was great to see you.
Why do you think they've gone from UFOs to UAPs? Why have they changed the phrasing?
Well, you know, I must confess that I had a role in that.
Really? You did this?
Yes. Way back in the 90s, we wanted to rebrand this whole subject because there was just too much pop culture baggage associated with the term UFO, too much science fiction, too much conspiracy. So we didn't invent the term. It had actually been around since the late 40s, but we reinvented it and we rebranded the subject to essentially make it a defense and national security issue, which we always thought it was. And it was very interesting. I actually went to a meeting in Washington, D.C. in 2011. I briefed this to a number of very senior people, and then the U.S. followed suit. And I was very pleased when, I think it was 2017, after the New York Times broke that story of ATIP and the U.S. Navy videos.
Right.
One of the Navy spokespeople basically said, UAP, yeah, we borrowed that from the Brits. And that, as I say, we did that back in the 90s to just reframe the conversation.
So there was nothing sinister going on here?
No. I mean, some people have read a little bit more into it. They've said it's all about perception management and it's a psyop. I don't think there's anything sinister about just, using language a little bit more precisely, and that's what we wanted to do.
Now, the end of May, NASA held a UAP meeting. Give us a synopsis of that meeting, and they expect something in July. What might that be?
Well, it's really interesting because, of course, as you know, just a few years, if you'd have picked up the phone as a journalist or broadcaster and said to NASA, I want a statement on UFOs, they would have said, we're not interested, we don't do this. And now here they are doing a study, having a meeting, the world was watching. I think, the most interesting point about it was that it happened at all, because as I say, a few years ago, this would just never have been entertained. But there you had all these scientists basically saying, yeah, we're taking this seriously, we're taking a look. And, of course, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick from the Pentagon's Arrow office was there. Basically, he has the government lead on this, and NASA essentially said, look, we will support Arrow, and we will give the scientific and technical advice. It's because it's important that in our study of this, we follow the scientific method and we take a data-led approach.
Well, what do you expect? Do you think something interesting is going to come out of these hearings and meetings?
Well, I'm not sure that the NASA study, I mean, look, I have tremendous respect for the people there, and I actually have met a couple of them, I think, over the years, but with the best will in the world, they don't have access to the classified information that the Department of Defense have. So in one sense, they're going into this with one hand tied behind their back. Now, to be fair, that NASA now do have an officer embedded within the DoD's Arrow program, and they will obviously give the scientific advice, and there will be some people in NASA involved with this that have security clearances, but for the most part, NASA have said, and I support this, they've said, look, we want to do this at an unclassified level so we can be as open and transparent as possible. That's the good news. The bad news, of course, is that DoD have a whole load of classified data that those folks won't get to.
Nick, in your opinion, is there something else going on here that is pushing NASA to work on these UAP stories?
That's a really interesting question. I think part of me thinks, well, maybe with James Webb Space Telescope and the search for these so-called techno-signatures, maybe people do know or suspect something. But maybe it's just, trying to hedge your bets. Think, we might find something. Let's try and get ahead of the narrative.
After the break, I want to talk about David Grush, the intelligence officer who has gone public in a very strange way, and get your take on that story.
Sure thing.
But in your career, now you were manning the desk at the United Kingdom's British Ministry of Defense, looking at UFO stories. Have you ever seen a time that it's so close to getting more information out to the public?
No. And this is... maybe you feel it too.
I feel it.
Reach out and touch it time.
It's a great feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, vindication.
Well, we've worked at it long enough, Nick, haven't we?
Yeah, we've been in the trenches. You and I, over the years. Our time is coming.
Now, we believe that they've known about these objects since the beginning of time. What do they tell us when they start coming out with information about why they didn't tell us before?
Well, that's going to be an interesting one. As you say, this phenomenon is as old as humanity, if not older. There's no real problem with saying, imagine the president tomorrow saying, my fellow Americans, people of the world, we're not alone. The real problem is what the next sentence should be, because and by the way, we've kept this from you for nearly 80 years. So what does that mean?
Yeah.
Why? And where is the accountability going to be for that?
They'll come out and say, we were trying to protect you.
Yes, it's all in our best interests.
The line from Jack Nicholson's Few Good Men, you can't handle the truth. I think we can. People are ready for this. I think most people, Nick, would say, I knew it. All right, we're going to come back in a moment with Nick Pope. We'll take calls with Nick next hour right here on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, Nick Pope with us. Nick, there is a former military intelligence officer, Air Force veteran, who says the U.S. government is in possession of alien spacecraft. He's a UFO whistleblower. His name is David Grush. Forbes magazine says it's pure science fiction. He has not shown much proof of what he has said. What's your take on this story?
Well, this is an absolutely fascinating account, and again, as you know, the news of this was just coming in on Monday as everyone was breaking up from contact in the desert and heading back home. But a few points, fairly sort of bullet pointing a few thoughts on this. Number one, this guy is absolutely who he says he is. Multiple journalists have checked out his background, and while there are some issues with the story, we'll get onto that, nobody is disputing that he is indeed retired Air Force. He did indeed work for a while for the National Geographical Intelligence, the Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office. So a deep insider in the U.S. intelligence community, and critically, he actually sat on the UAP task force, which is as you know, the body that handled this for the government before Arrow was given the lead. So here is someone really, really well placed, deep insider, TSSCI clearance, saying it's all real. Now the problem, of course, and I think you alluded to this, is that really while he's talking about this crash retrieval program, he hasn't seen it himself. So he's saying, I was told this.
Mm-hmm.
When I was liaising with various other people in the intelligence community, they told me that this was real. But he's not got his hands on any of the craft that he says have been recovered. Some crashed, some intact, which is kind of bizarre. And neither has he seen, of course, and it gets weirder than that, the pilots. And again, this is like every UFO conspiracy theory you've ever heard, right. But this time it's not on a kind of conspiracy blog. It's not from an anonymous person. It is from someone who checks out. So we are in really uncharted territory here.
He checks out, but again, like you mentioned, and as I've mentioned, he doesn't have much evidence because it's all secondhand to him.
Yes, and that's why, moving forward on this, it's going to be down to Congress to validate, or not, as the case may be, this information. He has already spoken to a number of people in Congress, mainly staffers, mainly people on the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committee. We have seen an unclassified complaint that he made to the Intelligence Community Inspector General, but that's essentially just about retribution that he says he suffered after he blew the whistle on this. But the claims themselves, it's going to have to be Congress that takes this forward. So we'll see what happens over the next few weeks and months on this.
Would you like an opportunity to talk with him?
Yes, I would. And I hope that insider to insider, we'd speak the same language, even though he's US and I'm UK. But I've sat down with a number of people who've been involved in these programs in the US, and despite the national differences, we do kind of speak the same language. It's like, hey, do you speak Intel? Yes, I do. So yeah, absolutely. I think I would know the right questions to ask, and yeah, that would be a very interesting conversation, I'm sure.
A lot of media outlets are somewhat attacking him. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I get that. I think that obviously News Nation got the scoop on this, and well, I say that. Of course, that's in terms of mainstream media. Before it even got there, Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal wrote up the story. Then the folks at Debrief actually published it. But in terms of more mainstream exposure, then it was News Nation. So what then happens, I think, is that a lot of the other media basically are kind of, well, we don't want to look as if we've been totally left behind on this, so they can do one of two things, or three things, actually. They can jump on board. That's not happened. They can take a wait-and-see attitude. Some of them are doing that, or they can attack, and some are definitely doing that for sure.
Have you been following the very strange story of the Las Vegas police officers who caught something on video?
Yes. Now, that is a really weird one, and I don't think people realize how much traction that story is getting. I did an interview 4 days ago on News Nation on that story. It's got about 5 million views on YouTube. This story has absolutely gone viral. I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's hit at pretty much the same time as the David Grush story. I'm skeptical. The cops picked something up on their body cam for sure, but it's a fireball meteor. I've seen plenty of them. And everything else around this story is, I think, some elaborate hoax or practical joke that's got out of hand. But it shows the power of belief, and it shows how mainstream this whole subject is. 5 million views on YouTube. That's phenomenal.
Well, what's so bizarre about this whole thing, Nick, is the police officers who were involved in the spotting of this thing, whatever it may be, got called to a house where somebody had called in and said he saw something crash at his backyard and that there were 8 foot to 9 foot tall, whatever, let's call them aliens, in his backyard. Those same police officers went to that house, interviewed the person, and they said, normally we would think you were nuts, but my partner saw something crash or come down, so we don't know what's going on. Have you heard about that part?
Yes, I have. But I mean, when you say that the partner, one of the cops saw
one of the cops. Right.
Yeah, absolutely, they did. But the American Meteor Society, they have reports for that night from all over Utah, Nevada, California, which shows that this was a really high-altitude event. I mean, literally, fireball meteor breaking up in the atmosphere. And that's what, when you look at the body cam footage, that's exactly what it looks like. I think everything else that's grown up around this story is just a mix of hoax and hysteria and the will to believe.
Does that kind of hurt what you do, what we do, and what people who are believers in extraterrestrial life try to do?
It shouldn't, because I think the neutrals and even the skeptics should say, hey, look, these people don't just blindly endorse every UFO story that comes their way. They do their due diligence. And so it should help. But invariably, if people want to criticize, they will, and they have. And they all say, look, David Grush story come out, but then you get 8-foot aliens in the backyard. See, it's all crazy. So if you want to throw shade on this, sadly, it's very easy.
Tell us a little bit about the Galileo Project.
Well, this is amazing. This is, of course, under the leadership of Professor Avi Loeb at Harvard, basically saying, well, look, NASA last week talked about all of this. We in the Galileo Project are doing it. And so the Galileo Project is building a network of telescopes and other arrays and trying to gather the data themselves, following the scientific method, looking also for interstellar objects. And actually, Professor Loeb, literally in the last few days, has sailed off to Papua New Guinea. He's I think, blogging on Medium, and he is going in search of something called IM-1, which is Interstellar Meteor 1, the first verified object from outside of our solar system to crash. And, is it just a chunk of rock? Maybe. But if it is technological, this might be the person who finds it. So Professor Avi Loeb sailing literally perhaps into history. And I'm very proud and honored to be an affiliate member of Galileo Project, by the way. I'm not a scientist, but there are people in the group like Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo and myself who maybe can bring some other skills. But watch what Avi Loeb is doing right now. I mean, he's off the the coast of Papua New Guinea as we speak, doing science, looking for this thing that crashed.
What is the Galileo project in terms of its comparison to the SETI, Seth Shostak's group?
Well, it's similar but different. The SETI program really listens for signals from other civilizations. So radio telescopes, it's what they use. They listen for signals. There is also the thought that they might look for light flashes too, optical SETI. Galileo project, as I say, it's trying to gather data on UAP, but also actually looking for artifacts within our solar system, which is something NASA mentioned. To be fair, I think actually NASA is following the lead of the Galileo project, not vice versa now, which is kind of interesting. And you know what the Galileo project is doing is visionary. And I think there are a lot of people talking about all this. Galileo project is doing it.
Can we make a drone that goes faster than a jet fighter?
Almost certainly, yes. If I knew the answer for that for sure, I probably couldn't even tell you. But, I mean, as ever, with aerospace technology, it runs 10, 15, 20 years ahead of anything that's publicly declared. So when you see a jet fighter and you think, wow, that's fast, yeah, there's probably tech out there now that makes that look like something the Wright brothers did.
Probably. Nick, since you've been working on all these projects, what are you working on now?
Well, one of the big things that I'm involved with is actually Ancient Aliens Live. And that's really it's a 90-minute stage show that brings all of this, not just ancient astronaut theory, but modern UAP theory and science to audiences all around the United States, engaging with people, starting a conversation. And I think we've done about 21 shows so far. We've got another 14 in the fall, starting thinking about 2024. Huge sellout audiences, like 1,500, 1,750 people. Ancient Aliens Live Tour.com. Really bringing it to the people because there's, I think all the stories that we've talked about in the show, people are kind of depending on the government to give them things, little crumbs from the table and all that. But what I've talked about is people like Galileo Project going out and doing it for themselves, blazing a trail on this, and Ancient Aliens Live, bringing it to the people, saying, look, let's do our own thing here, citizen science and all that.
How's our buddy Giorgio Tsoukalos these days?
Oh, he's great. He's such an amazing guy. Going on the road with him, what you appreciate is he's known all around the world, of course, as the guy with the hair.
The hair guy, yeah.
But you sit down and talk to him, and he'll say some of this in the show, by the way. He'll get into everything from the scientific method to linguistic anthropology. He's a real polymath, and I think, when people go to Ancient Aliens Live, they'll see the Giorgio they know and love, but they'll also see a sort of deeper side of him, a more sort of scientific, thoughtful, data-led guy.
He loves doing what he's doing, Nick, doesn't he?
He does, because he's a communicator. He has this great mixture of the knowledge. I mean, he's one of the most well-traveled people in the world, I guess, him and people, Eric von Daniken, yeah. David Childress, who's also on the show. But as well as his knowledge, his passion for this subject comes out. He just loves interacting with the live audience, sharing his enthusiasm for all of this. I mean, it's just amazing to see.
The UFO field, is blessed with him.
Absolutely. He's a hero, as are the other people that I'm honored to share the stage with on this, which is David Childress, William Henry, Dr. Travis Taylor.
Are your books still available?
Yeah, somewhere out there. If they haven't been abducted by the men in black. Open Skies, Closed Minds, The Uninvited, Encounter in Rendlesham Forest. They're all probably out there somewhere on Amazon. Some of them are a little old now. I mean, gosh, Open Skies, Closed Minds, probably not far off 30 years. I've been in this way too long, a lot of people say.
Keep doing what you're doing. You look young, for crying out loud. You don't age.
Oh, well, that'll be the sort of lizard reptilian in me. I'm only joking. But no, thank you. I have the passion as well. We talked about Giorgio's passion. I'm passionate about this. And, as we all should be, this is one of the most important and interesting subjects in the world. And if it keeps me young through that enthusiasm, well, bring it on.
All right. We're going to bring on the phone calls with you next hour, Nick, so stick with us. Nick Pope with us. The phone lines are open. And welcome back. George Norrie with you, along with Nick Pope. Nick, when you were first with the UK's Ministry of Defense, how did they get to assign you to a UFO post?
Just almost by luck. They move you around every few years just to give you a breadth of experience in operations, security, personnel, finance, whatever it is. And I happened to be due for a move at the exact time that the UFO job opened up. And I'd actually worked for the manager before. We had worked in the Joint Operations Center together during the first Gulf War, the Persian Gulf War. And he said, well, look, I know that you're due for a move. I've got a vacancy coming up. Do you want the job? And I said, what is the job? And he said, UFOs. The rest is history.
Were you into UFOs before that?
I was not. In one sense, I was a little disappointed in this because the jobs that everyone wanted were the jobs working in SecDef's office, that kind of posting. That was what the real high flyers were aiming for, and I was hoping for that. I didn't get it. I was run for one of those jobs, came in second place, and so then the UFO job came up, and I thought, well, that sounds interesting. And of course, looking back, I'm very glad that I had that job. It opened my eyes and my mind to a whole bunch of things that I'd never really even thought of before.
What was the most incredible case file that came across your desk?
Well, historically, of course, the Rendlesham Forest incident, sometimes called Britain's Roswell. It was before my time, but I did a cold case review on it. I pulled the file, and I was like, hey, they tell us that most of these things are aircraft lights and weather balloons, and I leafed through the file on Rendlesham, and I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't add up. So that was amazing. When it comes to something that happened on my watch, we had a case from 1993 called the Cosford incident, dozens of sightings, if not hundreds, over a period of about 6 hours in March 1993. Huge football field-sized, triangular-shaped craft seen over large parts of the UK, moving from a really slow speed to high Mach speeds in an instant with no sonic boom, something Lou Elizondo has now talked about as one of his so-called 5 observables.
Let's go to the phones. Let's start with John in Warsaw, Wisconsin. Welcome to the program. Hey, John, go ahead.
Hello, George. Hello, Nick. 2 quick comments, please. First, George, I want to commend you and Tommy for continuing to invite superb guests like Nick on the show that educate all of us on this most important topic. I want to thank you for that. My second comment is echoing Nick's previous comments earlier regarding hysteria, and I'd like to just give you my quick theory on it, please. This information has been in the hands of our government and political leaders for decades and decades. They always have an agenda and their own biased opinion that is rarely transparent. I believe that this information needs to be released to the American public through a non-political source, like a George Norrie or a Nick Pope or a faith-based leader, because hysteria will develop if this information is released from a Democratic administration and a Democratic leader releases it. Vice versa, if it's a Republican administration and a Republican administrator releases the information, half of the country will be divided. This is a very sensitive subject, and hysteria is absolutely possible. This is not analogous with the pandemic, but the hysteria is potential. And I wanted to commend Nick for his comments on that. It's crystal clear that if this is not educated to us properly by a non-biased source, hysteria is inevitable. Gentlemen, thank you for all you do. I'll listen for your comments.
Thanks, John. You go first, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that those comments have resonated with people, and I think it is an important debate to have. No policy made in panic and hysteria is ever going to turn out to be good policy, whatever the subject. So I think there's a time for cool heads when it comes to any of this, and I think there is a case because of the increased politicization of all of this, of everything. There is a case of finding some other people to take this forward. We mentioned the Galileo project under the leadership of Avi Loeb. Take this out of the hands of government. Give it to the scientists. Give it to the academics, people like Gary Nolan at Stanford. Maybe that's the future. Look, the other side, the other way of doing things. They've had 80 years. Maybe it's time to give somebody else a turn. Find new thought leaders in all of this.
And I wanted to add to his list of staff members who have put together this incredible program. Our executive producer, Lisa Lyon, of course, gets a lot of credit for this.
Absolutely. People who, I used earlier the phrase, people who have been in the trenches on this for years. Take it away from the professional politicians and such like. Give it to the people that have been actually doing the work.
And our webmasters, Lex and Sean, those are great every day, just constantly putting up great information, Nick.
Yeah, people whose names may not be known as widely as various politicians, but who, when it comes to the subject, have done more work than almost anyone. Unsung heroes.
Did you ever track the story of former President Richard Nixon bringing comedian and his friend Jackie Gleason to Homestead Air Force Base in Florida and telling him and showing him ETs?
Not in any great detail, but I am familiar with the story. And, there's something about that. I think, whatever you think of him, President Trump was a maverick. And a lot of people say, well, Nixon would never do that. A president would never, take a golfing buddy to an airport
sure
base.
They would.
Exactly, George. Exactly. That's exactly what you'd do. If you were president and you knew this was true, you would call up your golfing buddies and say, hey, let's swing over to the Air Force Base. I'll show you the aliens, and we'll have a few beers.
I'd have a coast-to-coast event out there.
Hell yeah. Bring it on.
Let's go to Mark in Baltimore, Maryland. Welcome to the show. Hey, Mark, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and it's an honor to talk to you, Mr. Pope. My question was going to be on Pentagon disclosure. In the UK, we know that they were much more open about talking about unidentified flying objects and unidentified aerial phenomena. But here in the United States, although our powers that be, they hint about it, they talk a little bit about it. They even went on TV about it. I think at the end of 2021, the Pentagon did our spokesman did on something about disclosure. But we're really not, getting the answers that we're looking for. When might you estimate that the United States of America might loosen up a little bit on letting the American people know what's going on?
Well, interesting question. I think it's happening now. I really do. And one of the most interesting things, earlier George asked me about the NASA panel. One of the interesting revelations that Sean Kirkpatrick made on May 31st was he said that the Five Eyes had just had their first meeting on this. And a lot of people were like, didn't get the reference. And they were like, hey, what's the Five Eyes? Well, it's the intelligence sharing alliance that links the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. And so the revelation that the Five Eyes have just had a meeting on this is really interesting because I think it may suggest that are beginning to talk to each other and say, hey, look, you know, some of us have been more secretive than others. Some of us maybe know more than others, but let's get our heads together and let's talk about how to move this forward. So watch what happens with the Five Eyes.
Good point. Catherine's in British Columbia, Canada, west of the Rockies. Hey, Catherine, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
All good.
George and Nick?
Hey there.
Great.
That's good. George, you said something about it. You wouldn't be able to handle it if, you know, if we knew everything about the aliens. And if it was like the movie Alien, I couldn't handle that.
You'd freak out.
You know, I would. But if it's like the Seven Dwarfs, I could deal with that. So Nick, I don't know where you think what they're like, or are you right in the middle? What are they like to you? You think they're going to be like?
Well, I think it might be all of the above, because I've always said that the idea that there's just one other species out there, to me, is as crazy as our being alone. So I think there's probably a crowded cosmos out there, and we might find some ET, and we might find some like in the movie Alien. So I think it goes back to the point that you know, there's going to be this huge variety that we'll find, and some of that, of course, if it's all benign and friendly, we'd be able to handle that. But what if there's something about some of these civilizations, whether it's what they are, who they are, what their agenda is? What if there's some secret too terrible to be told about this? You know, that's
as David Jacobs would say.
Yeah, that's what keeps me up at night, wondering, is there a secret too terrible to be told? Because if there wasn't, frankly, there's nothing to stop. Even if you were worried about the technology getting into the hands of an adversary, there's nothing to stop you saying, look, we're not going to give the technical details away because it can be weaponized. But yeah, we're not alone. And that hasn't happened, which does lead me to suggest maybe, and I know I've repeated this phrase 3 times now, but I've done that for a reason, a secret too terrible to be told. Is there something about this that is too toxic to give to the people right now?
Well, let me ask you this, Nick. Hundreds of thousands of human beings disappear off the face of this planet every year. Nobody knows where they are. They just, poof, they're gone. Is it conceivable that they're being abducted by ETs?
Yeah, when the UFO community talk about abduction, they talk about a scenario where someone's taken, usually out of their bed, sometimes out of the car, and returned. But as you say, what if some of those people aren't returned? Maybe that's the secret too terrible to be told, that we're just like the cattle, and every now and then the cattle are sent to the slaughterhouse.
Do you remember the movie To Serve Man, the Twilight Zone show?
Oh, yeah, an absolute classic. And you know, is it a case of art imitating life or life imitating art?
Are they cooking us?
Yeah, it's a cookbook.
Cornelius is with us in Louisiana. Welcome to the show. Hello there, Mr. White.
Hey there, George and Nick. Boy, I tell you, your callers are right on point. Nick, I really enjoyed you. I saw you on Ancient Aliens. I saw you on Banfield and stuff, and then the special they had last weekend on News Nation. But I come from a biblical perspective, and I was just telling Tommy, if you read the Bible, Ezekiel saw a wheel within a wheel. Jacob saw angels going up and down this ladder, so that could have been I call them Satan's ship and the Savior's ship. So in the Bible, it says they're going to come out sometime. So I'm not worried about the government trying to hide it or anything. They're going to come out one way or another. And Dr. David Jacobs is right. Most of these are demonic and stuff. So my question to you, have you looked at the Bible and seen what it said? God bless you, George, and God bless you, Nick.
Thank you.
Glad you're feeling better, Corny. So what do you think of the Bible tied into this, Nick?
Yeah, well, now there's obviously Ezekiel was mentioned, and this is something that comes up obviously with Ancient Aliens Live and the TV show and ancient astronaut theory. But there's a really, I mentioned The Secret, Too Terrible to Be Told. There's a kind of dark side to this too. And in the book of Ephesians in the Bible, you'll be familiar perhaps with the quote where it talks about Satan. And the phrase that they use is the prince of the power of the air. And there is a faction of people in government who believe that UFOs are demonic. And Lou Elizondo talked about it one time. He said, look, he tried to get some people at the Pentagon to take it more seriously, and one of his senior managers looked at him sternly and said, go read your Bible. So, yeah, the Bible is important, and it's interesting. You asked me earlier about David Grush. David Grush has said that in relation to crash retrievals, that there was one in Italy in 1933, and he said the Vatican, of course, through that, got to know about this. And for years, as you know, there have been rumors that the Catholic Church knows something about this. They have their own observatory. They've made really provocative comments. They've said there's no objection to baptizing an alien. They've been quietly funding some research into all this. So, yeah, watch the church and watch the religious angle to this. It's interesting.
Let's get one more call before the break. Mark in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, east of the Rockies. Hey, Mark, go ahead.
Hey, George. Thank you and Tom again for all your work being a coaster.
Thank you.
Not only made me a more informed person, but a better person, as I told you in the past. I was actually the last caller last time I believe Nick was on the show about the mothership I saw on Miami Beach with the fireballs coming out of the ocean up to the ship.
Yeah.
Remember that? So, George, I have some theories, okay? First of all, for years I was resentful of the government because of what I saw that they obviously know because they sent the choppers to investigate 3 nights in a row after I saw what I saw. But I kind of maybe concur with what the previous caller said about they're scared of hysteria. But my theory is this, is that maybe our planet is the Garden of Eden, and these visitors come here to harvest. This planet is so abundant in natural resources, and we don't even know what's under the ocean. And maybe that will explain the cattle mutilation as well. Maybe they're harvesting resources, and they're so far more advanced than us on so many levels. They just kind of view us as like cute monkeys or something like that, you know?
Are they harvesting us, Nick?
Yeah, and if that's true, when the farmer moves the cattle between the fields, he doesn't consult the cows. Maybe we're the cows.
Maybe we are the cows. But how will we ever find out?
Well, I think it will be through science. I think James Webb Space Telescope, the next generation radio telescope, the Square Kilometer Array, they may show us absolutely proof positive that there's life out there. And I think once we find out, in a sort of non-falsifiable way that there is life out there, all this kind of government secrecy and things may just fall away, because the time that you tell the people anything is the time that you can no longer keep the secret. Through technology, satellites, telescopes, radio telescopes, we are now reaching that point.
We're going to come back in just a moment with Nick Pope and take final phone calls. His website is his name, nickpope.net, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. George Norrie with you, our final segment with Nick Pope as we talk about UAPs and UFOs. What do you prefer at this point, Nick, UAPs or UFOs?
I'm a bit of a libertarian about this. I don't want to be prescriptive. I think people should pick and choose. It depends who you're talking to. When I was doing this in government, I used UAP. But when I'm talking to the media, particularly at the populist end of the scale, I use UFO. So I really don't have a preference, and I don't want to police this for anyone.
Let's go to the calls. Glenn in West Virginia, first-time caller for us. Hi, Glenn. Go ahead.
Hi, George. Hi, Nick. Good morning to you.
Hi.
When I was about 10 years old in 1973, I was living in suburban Chicago, and I was raking grass in the front yard, and I just happened to look up, and I see this UFO. It was terracotta in color with these very thin black line configurations, and in the middle were these circulating lights like you see on YouTube. But these lights were red, and this UFO did not make a sound. And I'm just standing there in awe, and suddenly I run into the house, and I go, "Hey, Ma, come quick, there's a UFO." So we go outside, and it was gone. And I think I'm the only one that saw it because none of my neighbors came out. It wasn't on the news, and I remember it like it was yesterday.
That's a great story. Nick, have you ever seen anything unusual?
I haven't, but I envy those that have, and it's really interesting when you listen to calls like that. You get it's the little details. You know, if people were just making things up or misperceiving things, you would get something very cliched. But you know, when someone says it was terracotta in color, you know, it's perfectly obvious. You're talking about real people, real experiences, and as I say, I envy them.
Let's go next to Chris in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Hi, Chris. Go ahead.
Hey, George. Thanks for taking my call. So my question is, I'm just wondering. So we're talking about, interstellar travelers who are like traveling tens of thousands of light years, probably, right? I mean, like we're
probably, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, like, how are we like taking them down? Like, how are they so sloppy that they end up like crashing? Or
that's a great question, Chris. You know, that's something I've always wondered, Nick, too. They have the technology to get here. They have the technology to bend space and time, yet they crash. How does that happen?
Well, you know, when we first, moved to faster than light travel. No, we haven't done that yet. Sorry.
We're not there.
Start a few conspiracy theories. Heavier than air flight, I was going to say. Obviously, aviation technology was in its infancy, and now we have stealth fighters and stealth bombers, but aircraft still crash. So unless, and even projecting forward and taking the caller's point, you know, unless we thought that we would hit a sort of level of technology where no, pilot error ever took place, where no metal fatigue existed, where no computer failures ever took place, unless we thought that we were going to be in that almost magical situation, accidents will probably happen.
Big time, won't they?
Yeah, and who knows? You know, I've heard people talk about Roswell and other things and say, well, it was a lightning strike, or it was that they were not familiar because, in a sense, they were so primitive they'd forgotten about it with our radar technologies, and maybe there was some interference there, or even a collision, two incredibly advanced craft, but an error, whatever, and there's a collision. So we can only speculate, of course, but I think that, sad to say, whether it's us or whether it's extraterrestrials, accidents will happen.
What do you think of the 1952 flap over the nation's capital?
Well, I just wish that something like that would happen now.
Me too.
Or even going back to the Phoenix Lights, if something like that was to happen now, you'd have millions of people with their smartphones, and hopefully we'd get some really good high-definition footage. We only need another Phoenix Lights. We only need a Washington UFO flap to take place now, and it will be game over because we will have that footage.
Let's go to Bill in Los Angeles. Hey, Bill, welcome.
Oh, hey, George. It's funny you mentioned the Twilight Zone. Last week, right before I found out about the Las Vegas supposed invaders, I was watching an old Twilight CD of that episode with Agnes Moorehead called The Invaders.
Oh, with the little tiny astronauts?
Yeah. And the next day I found out about that Las Vegas thing. But, Nick, I'm a former mainstream newspaper writer who spoke to you last year about the relative value of older UAP documentation because of the trustworthiness of analog video versus possibly photoshopped or hacked or spoofed digital video in relation particularly to the 1952 flyovers that George just mentioned. That there's a lot of great documentation, including at least one non-digital photo. But I wanted to, in that vein, I wanted to mention ask you. I have a 2005 History Channel video. I think you're on it, and it's got a segment called History Channel segment called Mexico's Roswell. And I'm sure you've seen those wonderful analog videos made by just private people of pulsating hat-shaped craft over Mexico City. And it is so bizarre. I've watched it probably hundreds of times, frame by frame, and I can't get my head around it. And I love the fact that it's analog. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point that sometimes you have to go back to basics, to a simpler age where all these sort of modern Photoshop issues don't arise. That's not to say that there weren't ways of faking footage in the old days too. You could literally throw something in the air and take a picture, or suspend it from a piece of twine, or do a double exposure. But it's a very interesting point, and I think that sometimes in our obsession with technology being the key, we forget that it can also be the problem.
What do you think of the pictures of Billy Meyer that he takes?
You know, I take a holistic look at that whole case. The pictures, sure, they're intriguing, but so many things to me about the story don't quite add up. A picture paints 1,000 words. Well, sometimes, but sometimes it's not just investigate the picture, but investigate the witness, investigate everything. And I have yet to be persuaded about that, I will be honest.
We have Dan in New York. Hey, Daniel, go ahead.
Thank you for taking my call. I appreciate it.
Sure thing, Danny.
I would not be too dismissive of these 8 or 9 big, tall aliens, because it is documented about insectoids, and they're supposed to be big. It was demonstrated in Close Encounters as well.
Right.
The thing is, in the Dr. Robert Sabaka letter, it does mention that from talking to the people on the inside, he got the impression these aliens were constructed like insects. So big and tall. So I wouldn't be too dismissive of the tall aliens. The second thing is big ones like that. The second thing is these UFOs have been coming around here, have you known, by watching Ancient Aliens for thousands of years, more than that. So if they've been coming around from some of these races for thousands of years, more so now because of atomic weapons, they're not going to take us over. They're not going to attack us. So it's pointless for people to panic. It really is. It's pointless. All I have to tell them is that, well, it's too late to panic. Just go about your life the way it is, and they're not taking us over or anything like that. It's pointless to panic. The final thing I will say, these aliens are not demonic. I could prove that if I'm ever given a chance. I got biblical scripture to prove that they're not demonic. If you want me to mention it now, fine. If not, some other time. But these are physical creatures from other star systems. They have nothing to do with Satan at all, and I can prove that if I'm ever given a chance.
One night when we have more time, definitely call in and let's go through some of that. Your thoughts, Nick, on the possibility that they're interdimensional?
Yeah, that is possible, absolutely. People like Michio Kaku now doing research and investigation into the idea of hidden dimensions, work going on at the Large Hadron Collider. I should just circle back to the couple of the points the caller made. I'm not saying that UFOs are demonic, but I'm saying that there is a faction of people, some of whom are in government, who do believe.
Or one of our callers, Cornelius, thinks that.
Yeah. So that was one point. And I absolutely, I also agree there is no point in panicking, but sadly, my point is that human nature shows us that people do panic. Whether they should or not, that's sad fact of life.
Do maybe movies like Independence Day scare the living daylights out of people?
Probably, but then the upside of that is that movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T., Arrival, and Contact should make people respond with awe and wonder.
Right. We have John in Alberta, Canada now. Hello, John. Go ahead.
How you doing, George?
Great.
I'm just curious if we're going to actually need to have an alien show up on your show before anybody believes that they're real.
Well, that's an interesting question, Nick Pope. What do you think?
Yeah, you'd get the world exclusive there for sure. But yeah, it speaks to an interesting point about where is the line between evidence and proof. And the answer to that is no one can agree. People set the bar at different levels. Well, vive la différence, I guess.
Would people believe it if we put an alien on the air if for some reason we had that ability?
No, they wouldn't, and that's the ultimate irony of all this. At the moment, there's a lot of people who say aliens exist and the government's covering it up. If the government comes round tomorrow and says, hey, aliens exist, there'll be a different bunch of people who say, no, it's just a psyop. It's to distract us from something else.
Let's go to Sean in Corona, California. Welcome to the program. Hi, Sean. Go ahead.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Sure.
Big fan of both of you guys.
Thank you.
I'm another security policeman on duty at Ellsworth when they shut down the missiles out there. I was sent out to the site, did the checklist as we're supposed to do, had some electrical problems down in the control room, which was interesting. Never happened before. I got up, and we were out there for the rest of the evening as the camper teams were still coming out to all the sites. We were only told that the inner zone and outer zone alarms were shut down. We didn't know that the entire system was down. But we did know they were sending out, like, the entire base. So we knew we had a bigger problem than they were saying. But anyway, my partner had fallen asleep, and he was a big sleepyhead, and I was sitting there staring off into the darkness. And, I mean, it's pitch black out there when the lights are out, you know. And I just felt something was outside that fence line. And so I got out of the Jeep and I walked over. It was summertime, thank God. And I heard some rustling in the gravel on site right behind me. I turned around. It sounded like someone was stepping right behind me. I look up, and the gate that we come through that we're required to, you know, do a figure eight with a chain and lock it when we're inside was wide open. And I never heard that chain get unlocked, get pulled through the fence, anything. And this is within 30 feet.
And I bet the lock wasn't cut or anything like that, was it?
No, absolutely not. It was like it had been unlocked with a key and just set perfectly even on either side of the fence. And I was thinking, I recently heard John Lear interview where he talked about their ability to be invisible. Do you know anything about that, Nick?
Well, you know, any technology, any civilization that has the technology to travel between the stars has probably figured out invisibility. There are rumors that we're pretty far along the road when it comes to that. The whole UFOs and nukes thing, Congress is looking at it right now.
Will we ever get the answers, Nick?
I hope so, and I hope you and I will then be able to kind of talk through it and, you know, discuss what we got right, what we got wrong, and where we go next, which is going to be the really interesting question.
What do you think of the comments of the late Edgar Mitchell, one of our dear friends, Apollo 14 astronaut, walked on the moon, who claims he was told by people in government we're being visited?
Well, I knew Edgar. I met him a couple of times. He was absolutely honest and truthful and mixed with people at the highest levels. So, yeah, when he says he was told this, I absolutely believe he was.
I do too. Nick, give out your website, please, and your books.
It's nickpope.net. All the details of my books are on there. And social media, Twitter mainly, @NickPopeMOD.
What's your next event?
I'm going to Roswell. I'm going to Roswell, of course, for the
anniversary.
The anniversary, yeah, yeah, it's going to be great. Ground zero, literally, of this. So lots of really exciting presentations, and my goodness, with everything going on, it's the perfect time for everyone to gather and have some fun and talk over everything that's happened in the last few months.
All right, my friend. Until next time, Nick Pope. The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.